All right, so before we jump into our panel discussion of how best to incorporate AI into the language and image generation process, my colleague Ellen Toner will be given an alternate perspective on how to think about AI in the writing process. Ellen started work with AUSA in 2012 and is now the Senior Editorial Manager for Education and Programs. She is responsible for reviewing and editing manuscripts for AUSA's writing program, such as AUSA's Land Warfare Papers and Harding Papers. In addition, she is a POC for the Chief of Staff of the Army's Harding Project team. She also freelances for Sophia Institute Press and other theological nonfiction clients. Previously, she taught junior high school and high school literature in Latin at a classical prep school in New Hampshire. Ellen has a bachelor's in English from the University of Dallas and is a graduate of 2015 of the Denver Publishing Institute and has studied German in Austria and Bavaria. Although she was never a soldier herself, she has 3 brothers who are service members. Ellen, the floor is yours.
All right. Before we get started, guys, I have a question for you all. How many of you routinely use AI in your writing? Raise your hands. Okay. How many of you think it's a good idea? That follows. All right.
Ellen hates it.
It's really good to see that. It's good to know what I'm up against because I am here today to tell you why you should not ever use AI when you write. Okay? So here we go. So I have decades of experience. I'm just going to lay this out. I do not have decades of experience in AI. I do have decades of experience in evaluating and teaching and correcting writing and editing. So that's where I'm coming from here, okay? And at the very least, my goal is to get you to just take a beat, to stop and think about what you're doing, and maybe, just maybe, change your minds. Bear with me because we're going to take a step way back, all right? Here we go. All right. It's going to get a little philosophical, but just, I know you can handle this. You all are intelligent creatures. You got it, okay? The main thing I want to talk to you about today is that as human beings, we each have distinct dignity and individuality. What are we? We are comprised of bodies and minds, souls, if you will, that combined have not ever and will not ever belong to another human being. On a purely biological level, we know this through fingerprints and DNA. On a mental or spiritual level, we know this because of the different ways that our minds work. We know that we are distinct through our minds and our talents, and that distinctness is demonstrated in our creative and intellectual powers. It's not an accident that we're all made differently from each other. Nature loves diversity. And as human beings, we are the crown, the intellectual crown of that nature. Naturally then, in our best and brightest form, we reflect that diversity in our intellectual capabilities, and especially in our practice and application of them. This truly phenomenal panel that's going to come and speak after me, they understand the ins and outs of this, like I said, a lot better than I do. And yet, I'm still going to stand here and give you an argument why you shouldn't use it, okay? And here's the argument. This is the heart of it. Your capacity for the exercise of your uniquely human gifts of intelligence and creativity is hindered, not helped, by the incorporation of this so-called tool. Just, if you take one thing away from you, take that with you, rather. We've talked in generalities up until now, but I'd like to talk particulars for a bit. What I do have some experiences in using AI, and I'll tell you why they have confirmed my initial suspicions that it's a bad idea. And I'm speaking specifically about AI and writing, not in any other arena, just so we're clear. So I'm going to start by picking on someone. The first time I gave AI writing a shot was at the urging of Major Ryan Crane. We were both at the Harding Project Training Workshop in Leavenworth 2 years ago. And despite my strong objections, he urged me to just try feeding it a prompt and see what happened. So leaning on my literature background, I gave it an essay prompt on a Willa Cather novel, and it spit something out. It was very impressive. I thought maybe this could be something that a 10th grader could write. But we all know the problem with that is that then the 10th graders go to that to write, and they don't learn how to write themselves. They don't learn how to think themselves. And when Ryan was talking about this, he said, you know, it's not like it's doing it for you. It's like having a mentor leaning over your shoulder, somebody sort of helping you out, checking your work. But the problem with that, Dr. Chad Engeland, who's a professor at the University of Dallas in the philosophy department, writing on this subject, he says, help cannot be constant, or it fails to be help and becomes permanent dependence. Ryan and I get along great. Thank you, Ryan, for letting me pick on you. All right, fast forward to last summer, and I was asked by a freelance client to do some fact checking on a book covering recent historical events that had been entirely written by AI. As I started digging into it, it was eye-opening in a really bad way. Purely from an accuracy perspective, it was atrociously bad, with any given paragraph that had maybe 5 facts in it, having 4 of them wrong. So I spent many, many hours, as you might imagine, chasing down hallucinated sources, articles, video clips, essays that had been used in citations for these facts, only to find out that they didn't exist, or that the data had been scraped from them in such a way that it was like a first grader's game of telephone that had gotten way out of control. I ended up essentially ghostwriting large portions of the book, which was far from the original assignment that the publisher had asked me to take on. And this factual inaccuracy doesn't even touch on the tone of the writing. I think at this point, we all can spot AI writing. And I'm going to break down what it is. These are the patterns that I've observed and why as soon as I recognize this pattern, I click away because I don't want to read it because I don't want it infecting my mind. AI writing, it starts with a few facts. Okay, well, actually, no, it starts with, hold on a second, where did I say? That warm and engaging feeling. So first, it has some nice language to sort of draw you in and pull you in and make you feel comfortable. Then it gives you those so-called facts to establish a sense of credibility. Then it talks about the emotions of the people who are in the story to try to make them more appealing to you. And then it switches and appeals to your own emotions to get you emotionally invested. And then once it's finished telling the story, it ends with some didactic takeaway, some poignant reminder for us all to impact us. It's formulaic, it's predictable, and it is not intelligent. The more time we spend in contact with it, the more it will influence our own language and voices, and not for the better. So here's a great time for me to ask you all a question. Does anybody know what the 2025 word of the year was from Merriam-Webster, also cited in The Economist? Dictionary.com says it's 6-7. That's not the answer I'm going for. Merriam-Webster's word of the year was slop. Okay, specifically AI slop. Digital content of low quality that is produced usually in quantity by means of artificial intelligence. Let's just not be a part of that. It's not something we want to be associated with. Being around things that are so antithetical to our human nature degrades that nature, degrades those capabilities within us. Why would we entrust our own thoughts to it? Ask it to think for us when we are born to be intelligent human beings, to think for ourselves, to own and develop our own thoughts, either through intelligent study or through good conversation with other intelligent human creatures. Habitually turning to AI for conversation means we're habitually turning away from human conversations. This is toxic to our ability to thrive as the inherently social creatures that we are. We are meant to be relational, not with machines, but with each other. How else is it degrading? Well, here's a great passage from one of John Adams' letters to his wife, Abigail. He says, "I must study politics and war, that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. My sons ought to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history, naval architecture, navigation, commerce, and agriculture, in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain." Don't forget porcelain. Remember this quotation of his, and have the pride in your work to exercise and foster a love and ownership of the sort of artistic and creative excellence that John Adams hoped would thrive in the lives of his grandchildren. Don't outsource your work to a cheap imitation of human wonder. Don't contribute to the gross rise of mediocrity. When we save time by using AI in our writing, what are we saving it for? What are we sacrificing? And for what? Does having a conversation with AI, whose store of information is scrambled and inaccurate, the dregs of whatever decent thought it could mine, does that make you better soldiers, better citizens, or better creators? Of course not. It's harmful to us in all of these arenas. It gives you a crutch that ultimately becomes a shackle, making it increasingly difficult to generate a thought without it. And it turns you into one more homogeneous mouthpiece instead of an individual with a particular creative powers and distinct voice that are meant to be a gift to the world around you. Look, automate vacuuming your floors, automate washing your dishes, automate delivery of a payload, an assembly line, but don't automate away what makes you human, your creative ability, your ability to think, to be inspired, to reason, to make something beautiful that only you can make. Okay, I'm going to wrap up, but let's think back just briefly on what we've established about human dignity, individuality, intellectual capabilities, and the call to creative ownership and excellence. Main takeaway: the incorporation of AI into the creative process is not good for our minds. It's not good for the quality of the individual works we produce. And it's not good for the preservation or intelligent progression of our language. And for a final thought, I will leave you with someone whose opinion on this is a little bit more moderate than my own. Leo XIV, known to some of us as Bob from Chicago. AI cannot replace human intelligence, and don't ask it to do your homework for you. It cannot offer real wisdom. It will not judge between what is truly right and wrong, and it won't stand in authentic wonder before the beauty of creation. So be prudent, be wise, be careful that your use of AI does not limit your true human growth. Use it in such a way that if it disappeared tomorrow, you would still know how to form authentic friendships, how to think, how to create, and how to act on your own. Thank you. All right. I think we have time for 2 questions or objections.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I keep asking questions, but I have a lot to learn, so I'm interested. So, ma'am, I agree with you on nearly every point. As someone that considers himself an illustrator and amateur graphic designer, I get incredibly frustrated when people label things AI art. Like, it's not art. It's a composite of other people's art. But I digress. do you think that there's any role for AI within the editorial process? I agree with you on writing. I think it should come from us. It should be from the heart. It should be from our knowledge and experience. With the challenges that we face and that I've heard echoed on short staffing, and of course there's deadlines, is there any role for AI in that editorial role to almost serve as a beefed up, spell check? And I'm sorry if that analogy has been made before. I'm sure it has.
I mean, that's the analogy that I think of too. And I do think that they're different enough in degree so as to be different in kind, if that makes sense. And I mostly get annoyed at the little squiggle in Microsoft Word because I think most of the time it's wrong, but I am sometimes helpful for it because I'm actually surprisingly not a very good speller. So it catches me sometimes and it's helpful. And I do appreciate that. Just doing the second little double take. I do think that if we adopt it into our editorial process as standard procedure, that it undermines our ability to be good editors ultimately. And yeah, it does save some time in the short term, but I don't think that it's good for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am, thank you, Cadet P. Connolly. So I loved this very much, but one question I have is, at school we hear time and again that the narrative is, in application to AI, it has to be used for some classes because otherwise we're setting ourselves up for a disadvantage when compared with China, for example. Given that some professors will approach classes with that ideology, what would be your response? And why is the human dignity of the individual thought process supreme to that influenced by AI?
In the situations where you're being advised to use it, are you talking specifically about writing or about analysis of data or strategy?
I'd say in this case, certainly most prevalently with writing it.
Okay. I think that your professors are wrong. Sorry to be so blunt, but sometimes that's what you need. All right. I'm going to introduce this panel now. They're going to give you all some good instruction on how to use AI when you write and generate your images. Okay. First, I'd like to introduce Colonel Andrew Steadman, who will be moderating our panel. He is the director of Army University Press, and he is a U.S. Army infantry officer with more than 25 years of service. He's deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, and is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy and the U.S. Army War College. Stateside, among other notable duties, he carried the football for the President of the United States from 2015 to 2017. He has published widely on leader development, and his TEDx talk, How to Lead Through the First 10 Minutes of Any Crisis, highlights the practical leadership frameworks he developed from both battlefield and White House experiences. Colonel Steadman, the floor is yours.
This will be the most challenging panel I've ever led, for sure. Well, thank you for that perspective, because I think we need to hear it. And sometimes when the whole crowd is moving in one direction, sometimes it does just take one person to raise their hand, step on a pedestal and say, hang on a second, maybe this isn't the best way. There's a cliff over there, right? The question we're faced with, if the entire world is moving that direction, then how do we still find a good outcome, even though it's a predetermined path we're on? And so I think that's what our challenge and our opportunity is here today with the panelists we had. So thank you for being here. It's my honor to be here with you all. This conversation sits at the intersection of writing, creative expression, creativity, leadership, and emerging technology, and then specifically how AI is reshaping the way we move from ideas to the page. AI can indeed accelerate research. It can augment coding. It can come up with new ideas and give you different ways to think about things. At the same time, it raises serious questions about authorship and judgment, originality and professional responsibility. For leaders and educators and creators, the issue isn't whether AI will be used, but how, and then where we draw the line between assistance and substitution. and then what we lose along the way. Right. So that balance is what we'll explore today. We're joined by three panelists to my left here. The first is Dr. Trent Lythgoe, who I have followed for a long time on LinkedIn and have read his CGSC writing guide, but got to meet in person when I got to Leavenworth this past year. He is the Fox Connor Chair for Leadership Studies at CGSC, where he teaches that clear writing is not optional, it is a leadership. He's the editor of the CGSC writing guide and widely published scholar in professional military journals. More recently, he has engaged directly with the AI debate in his Substack essay, Artificial Intelligence and the Bullshit Revolution, which he's going to go into here today. And in that article, he challenges how the uncritical use of AI can undermine thinking, writing, and accountability, I think in some of the line with what you mentioned, Ellen. To his left is Brandon Aguero. Brandon is the senior graphic designer here at AUSA. And then for over a decade of experience in visual communication, marketing, photography, and web development. He has a focus on translating complex ideas into clear, compelling visual narratives, a challenge that AI is rapidly transforming, which he'll get into today. His background is in visual communication design and deep interest in science and technology. And then to his left is Lieutenant Colonel John Bate, U.S. Army infantry officer, currently serving on Joint Staff J5, and has commanded at battalion level and across many operational units, including West Point. He commanded the Tomahawks, which I also commanded, so we share that. And I got to be his commander for 5 days at Carson when he came in and took over before I left. He's a good pastor scholar, has a master's in public policy from Harvard and a PhD in political science from Stanford. His work sits at the intersection of leadership, data, and decision-making. And you can totally nerd out with John. If you love data, talk to John. He has figured out how to insert data into decision-making and use it to augment what's going on in the force in really unique ways. He has a couple influential pieces out there that you should definitely check out. One of them is Protecting Soldiers, Preventing Harmful Behaviors, and Boosting Combat Readiness with Data. That was in MWI. And then his Military Review Online article is What We Can Learn from Measuring Unit Culture. He brings a strategic perspective, and we'll talk about what the Department of War is doing with digital modernization. So we're going to examine several of these areas today. I want to bring a little bit of structure to the conversation. And we'd like to talk first about the tactical, right? We're going to go from small to big. We're going to talk about the tools. We'll talk about what they're using, how it's being used, what are some of the risks at the user level, and then we're going to broaden it a little bit and talk about some of the philosophical stuff that Ellen mentioned, as well as some of the institutional responsibilities that we, who are responsible for stewarding the profession, might need to think about as we go forward. So I will open this question up, starting with Trent to my left. So at the individual level, how are you using AI in your writing or creative process? And then where do you deliberately stop short of using it?
Great question. So I think that from my perspective, the standards or what makes good professional writing haven't changed. And that is that it's valuable to some community of interest or some commander or some boss, whoever the audience is, that it's credible, it's based on facts, and that it's clear, it's easy to read and understand. So our goal hasn't changed. We've got to get to that standard. What probably has changed is the way that we get there. So the best way to integrate AI, I think, is some way that allows you to still achieve that standard, but in a way that's more effective, efficient, or both. This is still pretty dynamic, so I'm still experimenting to a large extent with how you integrate it in the writing process, but my initial kind of findings are that it's probably best in the pre-writing and the rewriting process, parts of the writing process, not the actual drafting itself. The biggest thing that we want to do, and Ellen got after this, I think, in her remarks, is we want to stay in control of our ideas and our voice. And so when you give AI a prompt, kind of cold start and say, write this for me, you sacrifice all of that. So I think in the pre-writing process, you can use it for research, use it to suggest a list of articles, that are pertinent to the topic you're engaging with. Of course, it's up to you to go make sure that those are actual real articles, right? You can also use it in the rewriting process. So after you have a draft, you can give it to AI. I kind of tend to use it as kind of a not very good assistant that maybe has a glimmer of insight time or two, but I treat it much like I might someone who I would give a draft to and say, hey, read this and tell me what you think. Where I try to stay in control of my ideas is that I don't copy paste, or I very rarely copy paste big passages from AI back into what I've written. So I might feed a draft to AI, ask it to evaluate it on some criteria, and then say, what would you change? And then I make those changes. And so fundamental for me is controlling what goes into your document and making sure that that's my ideas and my voice, and not the AI.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Thanks, Trent, for that. Brennan, what about you?
So yeah, as far as like everyday use, I'm more on like, the visual side of things. So the writing, I'm a little new at, but I'd say it's still very much like an additive tool. I don't think I've ever actually generated one kind of like image to use and just call it done. Like, I think you guys as writers, like your superpower here is you still have to write these prompts. And I think with these AI models, you still have to put a lot of thought into what that image is going to look like. So I find myself even sometimes just taking a step back from a computer and like really visualizing this image in my head and then translating that into words. So I'd say even my work here too at AUSA, like a lot of the imagery that we work with is, active duty people. So your uniforms, your equipment, like it's all very technical and specific. And I just don't think these models are quite capable of adhering to those. And so it's still really up to you to kind of do the mental like lifting of guiding these things in the right way. So at least for the time being, I think the image part, like it really depends on us to kind of steer it, and hopefully it doesn't learn too much and then make us all obsolete. But I hope that answers it.
Yeah. What tools are you using?
So I stick mostly to the like Adobe Creative Suite, but more recently, this is all kind of still new, but a lot of these like partner models, what they call it. So like you probably heard of like Google, Gemini, Nano Banana is kind of like the code name for it. There are other ones called ChatGPT, of course, I'm sure you guys have all used. If you're trying to kind of not so much generate an image, but you want to enhance an image or upscale it or denoise, like there's this other company called Topaz. But I think what a lot of these companies and Adobe, if you're creative, is trying to do is it's really, they're all kind of out there and it's hard to kind of be familiarized with all of them. So Adobe, for me, like they've kind of gotten everyone under the same like user interface. So like a lot of these are just clicks away. So I'd say like if you have a subscription or you work like in InDesign, certainly try and play around with those and understand them better, because they all kind of do something a little different. So it's not really just going to be one model that kind of fits every use. So yeah.
And Trent, I didn't ask you, what tools are you using?
Depends on the task, but for just kind of general writing stuff, I like any kind of GPT model, like from ChatGPT, OpenAI stuff. Mm-hmm. But any model that kind of remembers our conversations, I find tends to give me a little bit better responses and understand what I'm after. But Gemini works really well for coding, as does Anthropic's product, Claude. And then for research, academic research, I like Perplexity a lot.
Perplexity. Okay. Yeah. All right. Great. Thanks. John, over to you.
Hey, sir. Thank you. So I think similar to the rest of the panel, like AI is a tool for me. I'm self-admitted heavy AI user on the standard Gen AI LLM platforms. I use it like kind of like Google Maps. There was a time when I could read a map and drive to a city, or I can just plug the destination into Google Maps, free up time to plan what I'm going to do when I get to the destination. So I really look at it as a way to find information across the vastness of human knowledge. Number two, to explore ideas, to be a thought partner and really challenge myself tell the AI to take an opposing position and to challenge me. And then thirdly, to get to first drafts quickly so then I can do the human task of socializing, getting feedback, having human conversations. Also, as mentioned, it's really good at coding, so that helps me on the data analytics and the visualization front. So just the three general categories, I would say accelerating short form articles, academic writing, and then J5 staff work.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And particular, you said Gen AI is the one you use at work, and that just rolled out last month, right?
Yeah. So we're on the Maven Smart System platforms, among others, which are using the Claude Sonnet model, the rudiment, or their AI agents, which you can give instructions, but have a core large language model.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So let's think about the use of these tools for writing for a moment, and really to contrast it with Brandon's work, because I love that we have a creative designer here, because most of us in this room profess to be writers. At least we're not beginner writers. Some of us are amateur, and others are well above that in this room. And to use AI is it feels wrong. It feels dirty in some way, right? I mean, we've all, right? And I think Ellen touched on that a little bit. But for us writers in the room, to generate an image it's no big deal, right? I mean, I'm sure many of us have generated images and it's kind of fun, and we maybe even used it for a social media post or an article. And so why is that? Why is it okay for us writers to generate an image? Is it because we know that there's no way we could do that, so I don't mind farming it out to something else? But Brandon's perspective here is that with a lot of work, you could create those images, those stunning visuals, right? And so maybe that's flipped for you. Maybe it's a bit of an ethical boundary to use AI to do that. But is that necessarily different from Photoshop? So we'll start with you and just your ethical perspective from a creator standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy time to be alive. So I'd say it's important not to kind of let this thing, don't outsource your intelligence to these models. I'd say take a step back and realize what am I trying to make? And by interacting with it, are you kind of casting your vote to allow these things to take over a lot of more entry level jobs? It sounds like a lot of entry level people, those jobs are probably in the future going to go away. But that also puts a lot more pressure on you if you're somewhere a little higher up in your career, because now you've freed up all this time with this efficient tool. But now I think we've allowed it to kind of take more from us. So it's tough. I mean, we're chugging along. This thing's sticking around, so we kind of have to just decide how we're going to engage with it. And I'd say just think a little harder, and hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, it's tough to articulate.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, and it's helpful to remind ourselves that we're in the leading edge of this. Of this, essentially, you can call it a revolution, you can call it whatever you want. This is the gun has just gone off in something that will shape the rest of human history. Just happened, and so to be unsettled with it is just fine. It's also the exact right time to be asking hard questions like Ellen posed, and like we should ask here today as individuals and institutions. So John, describe when you are at a point where you want to communicate this idea, right? And you're a self-admitted prolific user of AI. How do you distinguish between your own thought then and say, at what point do you say, okay, I've got enough of my own thought, let me kick it over to AI and just flesh it out? From an ethical kind of purity standpoint, how do you wrestle with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think as a new Joint Staff Officer, about 2 months into the job, I was drinking from the fire hose. I had this article, the one you mentioned, the suicide prevention, protecting soldiers with risk forecasting. It was sitting on my desktop for a couple months. In order to get it out, I needed to kickstart it. I just didn't have the time. So what I turned to Gemini, dropped it in, spit out a rough draft for me. Not the final product, but because I knew how to read a map, to continue the analogy, and for the cadets, I can still read a 1/50,000, which you still have to do in the field. You have to understand the fundamentals. If you can do that, you know what good writing looks like. You just kickstart, accelerate the process. So please go critique that article in MWI. But without AI, I don't think I would have gotten that out the door.
Okay. Did you think about or did you cite it in any way as using AI to write it?
I did not. Maybe I should for the next one. But I know for academic writing, there's a section I just turned in and revised and resubmit that had a section on AI use where I did. I think the real question is, would the article have been significantly different had I not used AI? I don't think so. Probably about 90% the same. Some of the prose used my voice, but I was writing around kind of core scientific findings, which might be a bit different than more creative type work.
Yeah, sure. And I don't mean to put you on the spot with that, but that's something that we wrestle with. I mean, how many of you, especially the journal editors in here, how many of you have had a conversation amongst yourselves or with someone who submitted an article about their use of AI? Have you encountered that yet? We got a couple. All right. We'll get to it more when we talk about the institutions, but we collectively have a responsibility to figure this out because we are the ones stewarding the profession. So what does that look like in our institution? So I want to touch on that, if you would.
Yeah, it's a tough question, and we're struggling with it at the CJSC, in the academy. I mean, I think everybody's struggling with it. I think one of the challenges we have is when we say use AI, what do we mean? Because, both from I think when I say that word, here's what most people imagine. Give a prompt, get a response, and put that response in your paper and maybe lightly edit or switch it around, right? That is a use, right? Generating a draft, but it's not the only use. So AI isn't just large language models even. It's a technology that's in large pieces of, everything in the writing process. So another use might be, how are you going to go find the articles on a topic that you need to engage with in a conversation? Well, you could use something like Google, you could use Google Scholar, or you could use a large language model, right? Which are all going to kind of lead you more or less to the same place. There's risks and benefits with all of those, but is that using AI? Do I need to say I used AI to, go find some articles here? Likewise, things we know as spell check, Grammarly, Microsoft Word, increasingly those are AI powered. So would we cite, I used, Microsoft Editor spell checker to edit this article. So obviously there's some uses of AI that probably demand a citation. If it's AI generated text and it's not yours, to me, that's not unlike any other author. If you didn't write it, then you got to cite it, right? But there's kind of some gradients. So here's the way I've proposed that we think about it. This hasn't been adopted into any policy anywhere, by the way. But I think that AI fundamentally as a writer provides three contributions to our writing. There is AI generated text, which is obvious. The AI generates the text, you copy paste. I think that's a citation. There is AI contributed content where maybe you don't use the text, but you use it to contribute intellectually, like as an outline or to suggest how you might approach this topic. That's probably the grayest area, and that may demand like an acknowledgement note, like, hey, I used AI to outline this article, for example, even if I didn't stick strictly to that outline. And then there's non-intellectual content, things like editing, research, things that we already have tools for that we do not cite, like Google and Microsoft Editor, that now AI is either powering or offers an alternative way to get to the same task. And I kind of draw the line at about the sentence level. So if you've got something that's helping you substitute out, words and things like that, to me, that's not at the level of citing. Above the sentence level, if you're putting new sentences and certainly new ideas, now we're in the acknowledgement citation area. Mm-hmm. So that's a very rough way I'm thinking about it, but that's, I think, a way to think about it.
Have you had conversations with students, or is there in the classroom, are you talking about this and explaining it?
Yeah. But like I said, that's not the policy we have at the school. Right. So the policy we have at the school is to, don't use AI unless the professor tells you. Right. Okay. And so that's as you imagine, that's really hard for the students to kind of get around what is and is not permitted. But yeah, we try to have some conversations with the students about, there's the policy and what we're telling you to do and not do. But I think it's to their benefit and our benefit to have the deeper conversation of why, right? Why would you use it for this task or that task? And what risk do you run, by using it for certain tasks or others?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially with last month's release of Gen AI and the directive that says, let's use AI as much as possible across the force and ramp up our development of it. How do you balance that with the academic integrity? I mean, these are real questions that we're dealing with. We're going to pursue that a little bit. I do want to share one story. So last month, the military review team, one of the great parts about my job is that I get to work with the military review team. It's been around for 104 years. It's a staple of growing up in the Army is seeing the military review articles. So it was really neat to be with that team. And they also run the Depew writing competition, which many of you might have seen. We run that in conjunction with AUSA, and so it's been a great partnership over the years. And we got a submission that the editors were reviewing, and just something didn't seem right about it. Right, and so their experts editing guts started flagging it, and they started checking sources. When they check sources anyway, but they really started checking sources. And after they got to about 20 sources that they couldn't verify, they started coming to the conclusion this was a largely AI generated article, and it was a very well written article that someone had submitted for this competition. Yeah, chic, right? So we wrote back and we said, hey, we can't verify the source of these citations. Would you mind giving us some more details so we can verify these? And the response from this person was simply, I'll withdraw my nomination. So it begs lots of questions. One of those questions is, how often is this happening and we don't notice? The question is what to do about it going forward. And so in this year's Depew writing competition, we collaborated and scripted out a paragraph just to start to open this dialogue, right? It's not official policy, but we're running the competition. So this is the way we're doing it. And so I'm going to read it to you in a second. Would love your feedback, whether here or afterward. But we are coming to a point as institutions where we have to put our foot down and say, okay, this is how we're going to lead all of those burgeoning writers out there in this process. And this is what we're going to demand because we own the profession. So this is what is on the Depew writing competition. We wrote, while the use of AI when developing papers is not forbidden, authors should use it judiciously and sparingly. Authors must document their use of AI, including the tool used, its purpose, and the extent to which it influenced their work. All sources, facts, and citations must be true and accurate, and authors take sole responsibility for validating AI-generated information. The review panel will disqualify manuscripts when the members cannot verify the sources cited, and when there is credible evidence that AI has significantly enhanced the author's writing, e.g. generating content for the author. And we stop short of saying we're going to email commanders if we find that you've submitted AI falsely, right? Because cadets, there's an honor code issue here, right? You guys have talked about that a bunch, I bet, right? So as an institution then, what direction should we take this? Is this, you mentioned a policy. Maybe we want to start there, but where should we take this? Guiding the force and guiding the population out there and figuring this out. Open mic.
I'll just mention, sir, I had one of those hallucinated citations happen recently. At 2 out of about 100 citations that was awarded almost exactly supporting the title of my paper. So that's an indicator. If the citation is too good to be true, it probably is. So, but I went through and Googled every single source to validate. So I think I would offer to Trent's point is it's not about authorship. Well, in some cases, in professional settings, if you're doing staff work, it's not about necessarily authorship. There's no plagiarism in the Army when you're on a staff, but it's about ownership. You must own the results, must own the accuracy, especially if there's lives on the line.
What do you think?
I'd say it's different, I guess, in my world, but I would definitely agree, like ownership on the human part. And then, we're constantly coming up against like you know, it's the year or the word of the year, AI slop. It's like, yeah, I think we need to find a way to maybe distinguish these largely made like AI images from like something, you know, a whole team of like creatives have probably made, but it's still kind of in an infancy stage. So I think here we are talking about it, but I think we need to, talk about it and figure out what's the best way to kind of distinguish the two. Or
Okay. Yeah. What are some first principles that we should follow when we're talking about the AI guidelines going forward?
Yeah, so I've got my three that I'm proposing at the college and that I give to my students, and they are you're responsible, stay in control, and be transparent. So those are my three. And I think probably the biggest one, just relevant to this conversation, is that for Army professionals in particular, it's your name, whether it's an authored piece or a staff estimate that you give to your boss. It's your name and your professional reputation. And that's what the AI tool said will never, ever be an acceptable excuse for an Army professional. And so, I use AI quite a bit, but I guard my name pretty intensely. I recently had an experience where a colleague wanted me to sign on basically to a really poorly written article just to kind of he said, it's really hard to get published unless you have fancy letters behind your name, which I don't believe. But he just wanted me to thought I would just sign off on it, and I won't do things like that. So, your name and your professional reputation is important, and it becomes even more so as you grow in rank. And when you become a field grade officer, it's about all you got, right? Your name and your reputation will precede you. So, especially for the young officers, be responsible, and because your reputation is staked in some part onto those products that you produce, the ideas must be yours, and got to be able to back them up. The other thing I would say is, General Eisenhower said this morning, we got to know the basics for a lot of different reasons. But one of the interesting things about this conversation is, like what Ellen was talking about, what you were talking about with your editors, is the spidey sense of something's not right with this writing. So where does that come from? Well, it comes from learning basic writing skills and engaging with a lot of good writing and a lot of bad writing and all those things. And you mentioned my article, and I'll repeat the title once and then I'll soften the language. So it was about bullshit. And my argument was that AI has made us able to produce BS on a large scale because it eliminates all the surface level cues of poor writing. So it looks right on the surface. But when you start digging into it, right, you said well written, which I thought was an interesting phrasing, meaning that it flows, it's coherent, it doesn't have errors. But when you get into the substance of it, the more you get into AI generated slop, the worse the ideas seem, even if the words that are used to convey those ideas are grammatically perfect. Mm-hmm. So what is it that allows us to label something AI slop? What is it that would allow an AI user to take a response and say that's slop, or ignore the sloppy recommendations and use the one or two good recommendations? It's those fundamental writing skills. Mm-hmm. So the impetus, I think, or the need is to continue to teach those skills. The risk is that if we integrate AI too much in education, that we won't create writers with the spidey sense that you all have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. There's a corollary here. There's a comparison to leadership, because it's not just about AI is not just used for help in writing. You can use it to augment leadership, decision making, strategic assessments. There's a whole, and being on the J5, you probably see a lot of that. And we don't want to hear about that in just a minute. From a leadership perspective, though, how can we use AI to train our leaders? And should we look at that a bit differently, having an AI generated scenario that we can tailor to a particular unit in a particular situation? I'm thinking platoon leaders in a few years. Typing into chat GPT. I've been a platoon leader for 3 months. My platoon sergeant might be an alcoholic. What should I think about before I sound the alarm? Right? I mean, it's happened already. I've talked to people who have used it in that way. I've used it in that way. Right? when we start using AI as a thought partner for leadership, what things do we need to keep in mind? And John, I'll put you on the spot there, just coming out of battalion command not long ago, but you're face to face with this every day. So how can we use it in our leadership development?
That's a great question, sir. I think it's tricky. AI is great at synthesizing, as we talked about. So pharmaceutical research, there's argument that this will revolutionize, drug development, because it can just layer on tens of thousands of studies. Just find those things. When you aggregate enough studies, the machines will pick out the signal from the noise that our human minds missed. So I think there's value in that. If LLMs are trained on Reddit and social media, they may find ways to, pick up the signs of alcoholism and may put us in the right direction. But I think as we talked about, it's really about human judgment. Mm-hmm. All of these ideas, everything that the LLMs are trained on is based on someone's ideas, as we talked about. So none of us own those ideas, but it is good at picking up patterns that we can use responsibly. And if we apply them with full ownership and our own judgment, then I think I would offer it enhances our decision making and then gets us closer to, what is often a buzzword, but what we can become very real is decision advantage, better decisions faster.
Mm-hmm. Can you offer, again, I'm putting you on the spot, a couple prompts, a couple questions that you would put into an LLM in order to give you a broadened perspective or a different look at a challenging situation?
I think a couple of principles here, sir, are really the mechanics of using a large language model or a persona. So it's helpful to write about what you're doing. Give the model a context or RAG. You might hear retrieval augmented generation. That's just the lens that the model uses to answer your question. It just looks at probabilistically determines the next word. So not thinking, just looking for those patterns. So if you write in there, I'm an infantry platoon leader, been in the job 2 weeks, I have this problem. Provide 3 courses of action that I can take to my commander. So I think some of the best practices I've seen are to bound the model so it has less chances to be wrong. It can get you closer to a right answer and also have it cite your sources. This is critical. So you know where it's pulling from.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Trent, what's your thoughts on how to use AI and the prompts to use and how to help it give you different perspective?
Well, I think you got to learn how the tool works, right? You don't need to know the ins and outs of like language clusters and all that. But as Colonel Bate said, you have to understand that it's not thinking in the sense that we understand thinking, but it's making predictions about the next word. And that the prompts you give it, the resources, the references you give it, if you're doing retrieval augmentation, the data that it's trained on, all of those influence the probabilities of the next word. So if you understand that, going in, then you can identify why hallucinations happen and what the strengths and the weaknesses of the model are. I think to your specific question, if you're using as a thinking partner, one of the best strategies to use instead of like single shot prompting of what should I do about this, break it down into a series of subtasks and ask the model to show its reasoning at each task. Why is it displaying, what it's displaying? And then you can kind of correct it in the process rather than asking it just to come to an answer with no sense of how it got there. So that makes it a little bit more transparent of why it's saying what it's saying.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. Let's take a quick look at institutionally and across the force here, what we're doing with AI. So John, I'll take it back over to you. In the J5, working digital modernization for the Joint Force and the Department of War, what is on the radar there in your office that you're working on and what should we know about?
I'll take you back, sir, to a situation I found myself in first couple months on the job. You've got 2 hours to write an information paper for a 3-star on a subject you know almost nothing about. Let's say, critical minerals, where to find them, what to do with them, what they do. Where do most of us go? It's either what do you have in your email inbox, your coworkers around you, or you go to Google. Probably not ideal. This is I would offer a case to go to your AI agent and just give you a primer on just what you're trying to, a first cut to answer the question, at least a first draft. But the real, and this moves us to decision advantage, and I think it's what the Sec War is talking about, using AI in the appropriate way. The key limitations, in addition to prompting, as Dr. Lythgoe talked about, is understanding what the AI can see. If you ask just an LLM in isolation, it's trained on social media, Reddit, the totality of the internet. We want to give it the secret sauce of proprietary data, especially if it's on a classified network. So we're creating knowledge bases, the data foundation that increases the richness of the model's context. So we can go into U.S. Geological Survey data, pull that about critical minerals, and give you a much richer product. Again, with citations, so you know they're not hallucinated; they're actual, real, true ground truth sources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Brandon, how about your perspective, kind of on the enterprise level with graphic design and attribution, and even into photographic competitions and arts and all that? Where do you see kind of our idea of what is art, what is creativity then going forward with AI involved?
Yeah, I mean, it is a big debate and continues to be. I mean, this is, I think, a pretty philosophical question too, because especially with our relationship to art, like it's probably the deepest like human expression that we've had, and now we're kind of at a point where we're handing it off to these models, and it's a very uncomfortable thing, even though it's very impressive and it gets the job done. But I guess if we're moving forward and like saying all right, I just a few keystrokes made this work of art. I don't know. I think the discussion I think is going to be large, but I think my gut reaction is that we should start making distinctions between like, or what it can AI even create art? Like, is it only a human expression? Like, so it's tough, but I don't know. I think my heart goes out to, I think that's a human endeavor, and I think we should distinguish the two. So
yeah, and could even incite a pendulum swing back, right? Like,
sure.
I think we're starting to see a bit of a pullback from social media because, well, so much is made up and so much it is misinformation, and so we kind of retreat back to the sources that we know are more factual and more trusted, and that tends to be a human connection. So I can see that this as a we touch this space a little bit, and we pull back into the more of that human expression. Who knows, that might be in our future as well. Yeah. From an institutional standpoint, what do you think? What's our direction?
Two challenges. Number one, from an educational perspective, which is, of course, where I live and work. How do we teach AI alongside developing the basics? So how do you teach, writing with AI alongside those basic writing skills that you need? And I do think you need both. And then one thing I think we found out, which hasn't worked as well, is taking a policy approach to AI versus a first principles approach. As you mentioned, we're in the kickoff stage of this thing. And what we've found is that trying to keep up with policy at this point, because it's so unstable and things are advancing so quickly, is a little bit of a lost cause. So like over the course of about 12 months, I think we issued 3 separate AI policies at the Command and General Staff College. And that highlighted for me that, policies, which are decision rules, is eventually we're going to need, and we probably need a little bit now, but we should probably focus more on first principles. What are the key things that will transcend policy that govern responsible and ethical use of the tool?
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, we're leaving a good bit of time because there are probably questions, comments, challenges, maybe a few snide remarks even to what we've talked about today. So I would like to open it up, and then in about 15 minutes I'll close down with some remarks. So who's up to bat first? Oh, we got a few. All right, let's go right over here to the right.
Thanks. I wanted to talk just a little bit. I'll see if you have anything to add on. I just wanted to talk about elite persona generation and talk a little bit about how I use that just for some essays. So for the past year and a half, I've fed an LLM any paper I've published in the past. I read about 2 books a week and take notes, do it on a Kindle. I put all the citations in there. Say, hey, these are some books that I find interesting. Here's the page number, etc. And then when I have thoughts, I put them into that LLM. So when I write, I'll draft it originally, and then I'll say, hey, I want you to add these 2 or 3 books, and then tell me, does this reflect my voice? Right? And then sometimes it'll come back and say, hey, you're usually more consistent with this and not with this. But I've been doing that for about 18 months. So I fed it now 40 or 50 papers I've written, notes, etc. But then I've used it at work for Gen AI. I've said, hey, can you export this into something I can give to a coworker that can put a civilian furlough, ETP together in a coherent way that meets this PDF requirement? So it's mostly in my voice or how I would theoretically write it with some predictive analytics to help for me save potentially positions, right? Et cetera. So just some thoughts on the ethics behind elite persona generation, not just a prompt to the generic LLM. I sent a paper to Joe's team actually about this, I think on Saturday, so about persona generation. But it's just something I'd be curious, how you all look at that, because to me it's a little different than, hey, write me this, or hey, act like I'm Anthony Doerr and write me a brilliant piece of ficant, right? It's, hey, here's everything I've ever done and thoughts of mine over the past X amount of time. Can you help me create this? So to me, it's like having a conversation with myself. And I see myself in it, and I see almost no hallucinations, especially on 5.2 with deep research. I see actually fairly robust models, and hey, you forgot this quote that you included in there. So just be curious about that. I know I spoke for a little bit, but that's how I've been using it to augment and give my first drafts to help iterate. And I feel like I'm talking to myself. So I've enjoyed it thus far.
Yeah, I mean, that strategy and others is essentially, again, this goes back to understanding the model of the algorithm, right? It's a probabilities game, as Colonel Bate argued. What the whole game in AI is that if you just give it a one-shot prompt, it's going to predict the next word based on what it got from Reddit or Wikipedia or whatever. The more reference you give it, whether depending on the task, your own writing, the larger the probability or the greater the probability that that next word is going to be one that's useful to you, right? So it's kind of like the Hunger Games, right? May the odds ever be in your favor, only now it's may the probabilities ever be in your favor. So that's why you got to understand what the model's doing and whether it's that strategy or something else, trying to get that algorithm to spit out something you're going to find useful.
Yeah. And I'll just add a comment. Thanks for sharing that. We're using a custom GPT or an open model?
For one of them, because I actually did it in Gen AI.
Yeah.
It has to be in one chat thread, or else I can't remember. FYI.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have a custom GPT in ChatGPT. I have a couple different personas that I've been iterating with to see how well it works.
Yeah. Okay, great. And for those in the room who haven't played with it or experimented, you can, with a paid version in ChatGPT, you can create a custom GPT and fill it with whatever enclave of knowledge that you want. If you want it to be about gardening, you can fill with all the gardening books and all the gardening websites you want, and that'll be your gardening toolkit. It's just going to go to that information and those sources to generate its answers for you. I built one that's not open to the public. I just built it for myself. I put doctrine in there. I put a whole bunch of leadership stuff in there, and I wanted it to be a bit of a command thought partner to develop, pre-command course like kind of stuff, vision and all of that, right? And so you can tailor it. But imagine for a second here, because this hints on something that we really need to be thinking about, and that is imagine a thought partner that you got, cadet, your own custom GPT that you could feed it in your experiences and your articles and informate whatever information you wanted about you. And you can use it as a bit of a journal, a bit like he was talking about. And then 10 years into your career, you're standing in front of a formation. And a few minutes ago, and you were able to go in and say, hey, give me, what's that story from my deployment to the border where my platoon sergeant did such and such. Oh yeah. And it brings it up. Hey, here's the story. Here are the takeaways for you. You might want to share as lessons. Hey, give me the top 5 lessons I've had in my career based on your knowledge, right? So just imagine an interactive thought partner. And I promise you that the technology is coming to where the technology is already here, where it can listen and ingest all of your conversations and all of your interactions in video. Like that's happening right now. And so we need to think about this as a tool that we're going to have to use in this way. So thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. Joe.
Just a comment on that. It's something that Ellen and Trent said is, when we learn how to write, read, we get to get the perfect. I was talking to Drew about this, that I created a GPT for myself using a 1,000-word document for the book research I'm doing right now. I asked it a question. I was like, hey, is there something about this in the book? He goes, yep, on page 682. I open at 682. It's not. Like, all right, well, I'm like, maybe it did something weird with the page number. So I ask him to go, I apologize, you're right. It's on 685. I go to 685. This goes on for another 3 or 4 prompts. I'm 20 minutes into this. And then finally, I said, you were lying. It's not here at all. And it goes, that's really smart of you to catch me. And so I lost like 35 minutes playing around with it. So again, I think it's really important to know, like to know.
Yeah, and that's the danger is that you don't have the discernment, you don't have the knowledge, you don't know how to do it analog before you go digital, right? And so that's. But can anyone argue that we're going to back away from this cliff and that we're going to actually go into a world where we don't use AI very much? Anybody want to make that argument? We have Garrett back there. He can stand up in a second and explain how that's going to happen. But I think most of the population is going that way, and our kids these days are going to be raising this. So how do we figure out how we live in that world while still retaining the principles and that we want? So, okay, next question.
Sarmage Jesus, Sarmage Academy. First, Dr. Lythgoe, you put out some outstanding content on LinkedIn and through your subsite. I really appreciate it. So my question is, I'm a big advocate of AI, especially in PME. I wrote a couple papers on it. I mostly use it in the pre-writing process with deep research or perplexity. But as an author, I have deep concerns about copyrights. And it's brought up a couple of times about using large language models to make out personalized and feed it a bunch of inputs. And I know there's a big difference between localized private LLMs and then open source LLMs. I wonder, how do y'all see copyright in the future? There's a couple of lawsuits that are paying out authors now because they've been proven that they've used that work. How do you feel about uploading your content into an LLM? Do you have any concerns that will be used by others without crediting yourself?
Say pragmatically, if we're going to publish it, it's going to be in the public domain anyway. So I don't know if there's a huge distinction. Private conversations, medical data, definitely want to protect that.
I personally, no, I don't. I don't have concerns about people copywriting anything I put out. I mean, if I put out something different, maybe a book, I might. But it's, to be honest, something I haven't thought a lot about. But at present, no.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarmage.
Hey, Tom Spar, I'm in War College. I want to comment on Professor Lythgoe. I couldn't agree more with you. The way you described what it's good for, that researching phase, that polishing phase, and the citation. 1 word, 2 words, no big deal when you start taking sentences. Absolutely. Very much how we're doing it at the Army War College. In fact, we have a very progressive policy at the War College encouraging our students to use it. My question for you is, I think that's okay at the Army War College for colonels with 20 to 24 years of service. Not universally, because they all can't write that well, but I think there's an argument that the policy should be very different depending on the age and the maturity of the individual. So I wanted to solicit your thoughts across the panel on that. How should we be scaling, so to speak, the policies for the different levels of professional and military education?
So I'll take a swing since I'm in PME. I think in an ideal world, we would scope the policy in a way that encourages developing those basic skills at lower levels and progressively introduces AI later on. I don't know that that's practical. I don't know that I'm skeptical of the idea that we can write a policy that says don't use AI and the students won't use AI. So I think the most pragmatic way ahead for us educationally is to integrate it in a way that helps the students use it responsibly. And then we have some work to do on the curriculum side, I think, and the assessment side to make sure that we support that. And I'll give you one example. In our comprehensive exams, we've gone to a written and oral piece where they have to defend their ideas, right? And so if you just have the written piece, there's always the danger that that's just kind of AI generated and they don't really understand it to the depth that they appear to because they've used AI pretty skillfully. But when you bring them into a room and say, on your second page, you make this argument, can you go into a little bit more depth for me? That kind of enhances some accountability and things like that. So while ideal, that policy would be ideal, I think probably the more pragmatic way ahead is sort of a hybrid approach where we have to integrate AI. They're going to use it anyway, I think. At the lower levels. And so how can we shape that use to be responsible, ethical, and still get at those kind of basic discernment and judgment skills that we've been talking about? Sure.
what we're doing with the comps is we give them 5 questions, right? And then we do follow-on questions afterwards. So they can prepare. They don't know which one they're going to get. They get it, and then we pepper them with follow-on questions. We found with 2 or 3 students over the last couple of years, they would come in with beautiful first answers, and then they couldn't answer very much afterwards. In fact, we had one last year that came out and just admitted, hey, I used AI a lot throughout this. I didn't do most of the readings, and I used it when I prepped. And it very much reflected on their ability to answer when they didn't know the question was coming. And then just the depth of their knowledge was clearly lacking. So I think it's a good lesson learned that we want to share with everybody, that that does affect the depth of the answers. So
Yeah, for sure.
Major Vorsky over in RSOF. So this is kind of a 2-part question. And sir, thank you for saying the cat out of the bag portion. Pandora's box is open. It's not going away. And I think that if we just state there in the beginning, the first piece is I reread the CGSC plagiarism guide. It's pretty ambiguous. And I think that's kind of the point. But it also speaks on the instructor side that they're allowed to use AI when they want to, and kind of along those sides. One of the things that you were one of the things you were talking about earlier is what is actually considered AI at this point. Because I know when I was finishing my doctorate, Grammarly was not considered AI whatsoever. It was the basics. Now Grammarly is considered AI. Now we're talking about all these programs. And when inside the actual CGSC policy, it speaks on if you use it for planning or prepping, it should be cited. One of the things and one of the concerns that I have is that we're now stating that pretty much if you do any Google search, technically you're using AI. And if you don't cite that you did a Google search, and by no means am I saying that this is what is going to happen, but it can quickly turn into, because Gemini is giving searches from Google. And if you look at it and click the first link, technically, if you don't cite it, you just used artificial intelligence in your planning process. So I definitely think, one, there needs to be a streamlined, this is how we're going to do it. It also does need to put the onus on the actual writer, because if you're not checking what you're writing, that is blunt plagiarism, however you want to state it. So there does need to be a happy medium. And I do think that now that we're moving it towards the academic side, it does need to actually be A, B, C, D, and E have to be followed for this to be categorized in it, because it is very ambiguous. And the second portion, which kind of does fall into this, is at what point do we become gatekeepers of actual academic excellence? Right now, and I just double checked it just to be on the safe side, but for our national study, U.S. government put out at the 12th grade reading level of all graduates is 37%. AI is now creating 50% equivalency. So are we upset that we're going to be bringing the bottom up and arguably the top down, but the top is the side that's actually caring about this, which we're going to be doing our due diligence and writing properly, where we can get more to the table instead of less? So I know that's 2 separate topics, but I really wanted to throw that out there.
Let me take a shot at the first one very briefly, because that's a very CGSC-like specific question.
And I apologize, that was not meant to be an attack.
So what you read was the 3rd iteration of the 3 policies, right? No, those aren't even the start. Everything's still pretty dynamic. I think if we're waiting again for a policy solution, we're going to be waiting a long time. I think it's better, as I said in my remarks, to focus on first principles. That policy is flawed, and the reason it's flawed is because it treats using AI, like I said, as text generation, copy paste, without acknowledging the fact that, for example, using Google, you've technically used AI. So the policy needs to change, and there's an interesting tension right now between DOD's like use, and in the PME we're like, yeah, but academic integrity. I'm not sure what the way ahead is, but I'm pretty sure that it revolves around understanding sort of the nuance and the many kinds of things, tools that AI powers, and not treating it as a single use case, and then developing and adhering to some first principles. But your point is taken that the policy isn't very good, but I wouldn't expect a better one anytime soon.
Fair enough.
To be honest. Yeah.
It's an academic and an institutional operational question. Go ahead, John.
So that was like a very important point. One thing you said is I think we're giving a large all the population virtually access to better thinking and a wider base of knowledge, regardless of where, when, how long you went to school. So I think about this in terms of like staff continuity. Once you come into a new job, should you have to wait 6 weeks, 6 months to become good at your job, or should you be effective from day one? You can plug into your digital portfolio, your AI agent, and know exactly what the last guy or girl knew. So that's probably good for the organization, from an organizational standpoint.
Let me ask a question that might raise some eyebrows right quickly because we haven't talked about it already. Should we be using AI in award writing, evaluation writing, counseling? You just leave it out there for a second. Yeah. Okay.
In the room, having looked at awards, evaluations, and so on that have been written. Absolutely.
Okay.
We get you a mic so
So, absolutely. So absolutely we should. I'm probably the most pro AI person in the room. Like, there's been a lot of conflation between AI slop and AI use. There's been a lot of implication of single run AI and then submit. And that's all improper use of it. It should be a iterative conversation, iterative building. Like, is it in your voice if you run it through once? No. Is it in your voice if you run it through, edit it, run it through, edit it, run it through, edit it, look over, keep changing it and tweaking it and so on? Yes, that's in your voice. There's been a lot of conflation, implication of single use and done. And that's, again, not proper use. And in regards to evaluations, awards, and so on, absolutely it should. But it is not a one-stop shop. It is still edited. It is still done over and looked over. It is an accelerant. It is not a solution.
Okay. Thanks for that. We have a different perspective on that question. Yeah, Garrett. Or
on. Okay. So I'm the opposite side. I am, thank you very much, Ellen, because I am very.
Check the mic there.
Is it on? Is it on? Okay, is it working? Is it working now?
There we go.
Okay. Okay, so I have to eat the mic. Okay. So I'm the opposite right there. Thank you, Ellen, because I'm very much from your standpoint. I am extremely anti-AI. I wrote multiple papers about it. And no, I don't think you should use it all when it comes to award writing, any type of writing, because as Ellen talked about earlier, it destroys your creative thought, your ability to think. If you continue to use it for those things, you can't do the basics. And I think about, not to look at the cadets, but like you're growing up that generation now where they've been inundated with it. How many of them I'm not saying you guys, they can't read analog clocks. They can't do basic math because they have so much of this technology. They're growing up with this type of writing. They can't write. We should be the gatekeepers or say, no, let's not use this. Now, I know we've talked about AI generally right now, but we need to focus on generative AI because having done a lot of research and there's multiple types of AI. So it's looking at it from the generative side, the GPTs and such like that. Don't be using it for that kind of stuff. Use your brain. As Ellen said, like we have this capability. Our brain is a muscle. If we don't use it, like we're going to the gym, we're going to waste away. And one of the points that I had was, think of it as a bell curve. Yes, Pandora's box has been opened. You can't close it, but think of a bell curve for me. I want to paint this picture for you. The horizontal axis is technology, the dawn of humankind, forging fire, moving forward. Your vertical axis, your y-axis, is going to be intelligence, creative thinking. As we continue to move on with technology, our thinking, we have increased our intelligence. I argue that we're either at the top of the bell curve or now we're falling because our technology is hit to a point now where we are, as a population, becoming less intelligent. There's multiple studies out that show that, kids don't know things. I think we mentioned some about the lower reading levels now, and that can be compared to the use of this type of technology. That's why I argue we shouldn't be using this at all. Is there applications for it? Yes. When it gets into some stuff with data, I'm a logistician. We do a lot with data. There are some applications where it can help you out. But when it comes to generating ideas or writing, that is not something that's going to be an efficiency that's worth our humanity. And that was going to be, of course, my question for the panel. Is your efficiency really worth sacrificing your humanity? And I argue to look back at that bell curve, because I look at it two ways. Yes, we can't close the box. So it's going to end up in two. This is the worlds that I see. One,
in 30 seconds.
No, it's easy. It's two words. One, yes, you could say joke Skynet, or you can do, or the other one, idiocracy. And I really think we're going to turn into the world idiocracy sooner rather than later.
Okay. I want to hear from a cadet, because I think we had a cadet hand. Yes, sir. And are we down to under 5 minutes, Ellen? I think we're there, right? Yeah, this is the last one.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, gentlemen. And I just actually wanted to piggyback off that. In Plato writes about the Socratic dialogue with Phaedrus, and writes about how writing has become not a tool to support memory, but the need to be reminded. And I think there's a lot of lessons we can draw from that. But my question, gentlemen, is from discussion earlier with leaders in this room, it seems that failure and learning from that is crucial to leadership development, perhaps most crucial. Yet the elimination of failure and struggle seems to be both the greatest promise and the greatest peril of AI. If PLs learn to defer judgment, COA development, even decision-making to the intellect of the bot, what is the role of the PL?
So I'll take a very brief shot at both those because I know we're low on time. So I think we're assuming two use cases. One is no AI, and the other is AI first, right? Or maybe even AI only. There was actually a study recently, and it was looking at learning and retention, but I think it's analogous to that situation. It actually looked at three strategies: no AI, AI first, then human, and then human first, then AI. In other words, the human generated the content and then used the AI. I don't think it'll surprise anyone that the no AI use did pretty well with learning, and the AI first group didn't do very well at all. But what was really interesting was that middle group, human first and then AI, did just about as well as the human only group. So the research on this is still kind of in the infant stage, as is the technology. But what I think it's pointing to is that it's not as simple as AI or no AI, but how you use it and in what order you use it that matters. So more to follow.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We are wrapping up in just a moment. Let's see. I will ask you to thank you. Actually, let's give a round of applause to our panelists, please. I had written some closing comments, hoping it was going to be fairly in line with what we were talking about, and I pretty much nailed it. I just want to highlight one perspective, and that's the idea of a creative Rubicon. Is kind of what we're thinking about here. You know, there's a line where AI does something that you're not capable of doing, and it's not something that's not your style, not your intent, not a logic that represents you anymore. And for all of us, that's a different line. And so we have a responsibility to figure out where that is. And we also have the professional obligation to steward the use of AI, not shy away from it, because I think we decided we can't, but we are in a position to help other people wrestle with it. So the burden is on us as writers, as leaders, professionals, to decide where that Rubicon is for us and also for the institution, and to use these tools deliberately. So I just challenge you as a call to action for everyone in the room, go back and see how you can steward the profession in your circle of influence using AI. And I'll turn it over to you, Ellen. Thanks.
Thank you. It's given me a lot to think about. And I do appreciate that in many ways I have the luxury of standing back and standing on a high horse and saying, don't do this. But I'm not on the front lines in the way that so many of you are. So thank you. The box is open, like you said. All right. We can continue the conversation over at Courthouse Social at 14:30. And before we go, General Smith has a few closing remarks for us. Thank you so much, Colonel Steadman.
So what did you guys think about today? Round of applause today. I want everybody to understand that just because it's disagreement, that does not mean disrespect. So understand that we want different viewpoints, but make sure it's not a personal attack. And you remind me about the Army profession. You guys haven't seen this video, but a few years ago, I want you to write this down. because it's about trust, right? So in the tenets of the Army profession, let me back up a little bit. So the Army I can't remember what year it was, we had some issues with ethical things across the Joint Force. And then the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, who used to be the chair commander, made every general officer go to West Point for 3 days to redo and reevaluate our Army ethic. And then after that, the Center for Leadership, CAPE, Army Professional Ethic came out of that. And a video came out of that that talked about being a steward of the profession. But the steps associated with that is trust being the bedrock, expertise, which is what we've been talking about today, honorable service, how do we operate, what's our esprit de corps, what's our passion for what we do, and then being a good steward of the profession. And that's kind of what we're talking about. And I'm telling you guys that because in 2012, I started, and that's a long time ago, I started talking about this as a leader to our young folks. And I will tell you what you guys are talking about today is as applicable to that time as it is today. So as you're here, you got to understand how important the chief sees this. That's why he put it in place, right? And it takes a lot for the Army to do, well, any profession, but the Army to put something like this in place. So he took the time to do that. So you are effectively the stewards of the powerful prose, the Army writing system and process. Not anybody else. You're looking for somebody else to your left and right? It's you. You are the cohort that's going to go back out and tell us about what those things are that we, collectively, the Army, both inside and outside, have to do, right? But you got to deliver it as a professional and how you execute. Don't be an acolyte like you're going to fall on your sword, right? All day, every day, because nobody will want to listen to you. But how do you incorporate it in what you do so people understand the mission to defend our nation and the things that we need to do? Okay? All right. No dancing on the tables tonight. And if you do, please don't take any pictures for social media. All right, that's all I got.